Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us a little early. We'll get started in about 60 seconds, so sit tight and we'll start right at the top of the hour. All right, well, that was a little less than 60 seconds. It's 2 o'clock Eastern here in Atlanta, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello again, and thank you all for joining us today for this Ask the Experts webinar. I'm Allison Phillips, the Director of Marketing on Cox Media's corporate team, and I'll be your host today. Some quick housekeeping items before I introduce our guest expert. This presentation is being recorded. You'll receive an email with the recording so you can watch it again at your convenience or share it with your teams. We have about 45 minutes of great content for you and 10 minutes or so set aside for Q&A. If at any time during the presentation you have a question, go ahead and type it into the question box on your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We received a few when you registered, and we'll make sure we get to those as well. So now that that's out of the way, I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest expert, Jen Leahy. Jen is the CEO of Dragon Army, Atlanta's leading privately owned digital marketing agency. Jen took the helm at Dragon Army 4 years ago to drive the company's growth, and since then the agency has tripled in employees and doubled in revenue. Giving you all a peek behind the curtain here, the Cox Media corporate marketing team actually partnered with Jen's team to revitalize our own web presence last fall. So as a marketer, marketing, we can certainly vouch for this expert's experience and how critical a strong digital presence is to maximizing your advertising effectiveness and ROI. Jen brings 20 years of mobile, digital, social, and brand building experience with her. A proven leader, she's had success in building product solutions, campaigns, and activations for some of the world's biggest brands across a variety of industries, such as Nike, E-Trade, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Cox, Chick-fil-A, BMW, and Warner Media. Jen's a native New Yorker who now lives in Midtown Atlanta with her husband, Brian, and their dogs, Fred and Ginger. For today's conversation, Jen's unique expertise will help outline the importance of an optimized digital presence for your business, both for this year and beyond. So with that, Jen, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Allison. I really appreciate it. What a generous introduction. I think you've said it all. But I will add one more thing if we just flip at Dragon Army. We do call ourselves dragons, so you may hear me refer to myself as a dragon today. And we are so thankful for our partnership to date with not only the Cox Media team, but others within the enterprise on the Cox business and residential teams. So again, as Allison said, I'm here today to help offer some hopefully very tangible and actionable insights for you as you continue to define, build, redesign your web presence, and also all of the ecosystem that supports that presence. And because at Dragon Army, our purpose is to inspire happiness, I want to offer today to inspire some of your happiness after we finish. The first one of you that happens to email me after our chat at this email address you see here, it's jleahy@dragonarmy.com. We would be happy as an organization to have an hour consultation to learn more about your own unique situation and ways that we may offer insight and support. So with that said, we're going to dive right in. The first thing that I want to outline for you today is kind of the components we're going to talk about. So at Dragon Army, we think about the web experience as a symbiotic experience with lots of different critical elements that go into creating a successful and winning presence. And for us, we think about that in these 3 ways specifically: discoverability, engagement, and inclusivity. And so as we move forward here, what you'll see is how these 3 things really support one another. And if we advance, please, you'll see that we're going to talk about how all of these things really do work to create that winning experience. And why does that balance right now matter more than ever? Really what we're looking at is the digital divide that is happening out in the world. So, side fact, the world's connected population continues to explode. Right now, in just the last 12 months, we've seen a population growth of 170 million. And those are people that are connecting, using the internet, going to web social experiences. That said, with that explosive growth, there is still a huge segment of our world's population that remain unconnected. Right now, that's at about 3 billion people. And so, as technology and resources advance, and those individuals eventually join the web, they are not going to be as tech savvy and they may struggle online. So, when we think about the future of web practice and design, it should be clear and it should be accessible. And the way to do that is really thinking about these principles that will unpack in exclusivity, the principles that we'll talk about in terms of engagement, and then making sure at the end of the day, once that site experience is as optimized as possible, that people can find it. They can find your site and they can find the important and valuable content that is on that site. And as we think about this accessibility thing, I'll just plant a seed in your head. It's really like trying to build a site experience for your grandmother, right? Maybe someone who would have a hard time finding things, clicking on the right buttons. And I'll point you to one of my favorite examples in a brand that does an amazing job for lots of reasons, but Google. If you think in your mind right now, landing on Google's start page, there's only one window. It has all the basic information you need, and you're not in any way distracted from your main purpose to search for something, right? So hopefully, as we go through these components today, you get a little bit more context and some tangible, actionable things that you can do to implement in your own experience. So we're going to start with this first pillar of discoverability. So again, that's easy ways to make sure you can find your website and the information on it. And the very first thing I want to do here is just really define what discoverability equals when we talk about it in a web sense. Discoverability really amounts to sales in the digital world. I love this quote on this next slide from Dev Shandon. He's a roboticist, but it really comes down to if people can't find what they need and what they're looking for on your site, you're losing money at the end of the day. You're losing the ability to engage them, convert them, and to engage with your services and products, right? So let's talk about a few tactics and elements of the site discoverability. First one is SEO. Many small, and I know today we probably are joined by many small and medium-sized business leaders or marketers, and I recognize that many of you may struggle to get traction in SEO because you're competing often against larger, more established brands and websites. So, 3 tips as you consider your own practice. First is local SEO. If you can, try to optimize for specific area or areas. This will obviously work better for some businesses than others, but can be really effective because you're narrowing the pool of people you're comparing against. There are lots of great useful guides out there for optimizing your local SEO, but some of the highlights include making sure you create and verify a Google My Business page. Make sure that you're adding location pages to your website if you have multiple locations, and make sure that your address is really consistent across your digital presence. So not only on your site, but any other elements that you might have. If you have microsites, if you have social listings, making sure that that address is consistent. So when people are searching for you, it comes up consistently in the SEO rankings. The second piece is content. So great content, we probably all know this, is really critical for SEO. Making sure you have robust service pages, a really strong About Us page. Again, those location pages, and blog posts are all really great places to start to target to improve your overall approach to SEO. And if you have a lot of competition for your product or services, consider targeting longer tail keywords or keywords that are more specific. So this example I have here, or an example like making sure you optimize for project management software. If that's what you're looking for, maybe try something like project management software for agencies or project management software for freelancers, right? Getting much more specific as you think about the keywords that you want to be searched for. The third piece related to SEO that I want to talk about is site performance. One of the biggest mistakes that we see partners making, especially small to medium-sized businesses, is underestimating the impact that technical aspects of your site have on SEO. So things like page load speed, mobile performance, URL structure, they all combine to play an important role in your SEO, particularly now that Google's algorithm is prioritizing mobile. Really need to make sure that that site responsiveness, and if anyone is unclear what I mean when I talk about site responsiveness and mobile performance, when we talk about responsiveness, we talk about breakpoints. So we start, frankly, at a mobile phone, we scale up to tablet, and then we scale up beyond that to desktop and anything in between, depending on device. So really, when you're talking about or you're thinking about, is your site responsible, making sure people can access that. More than 60% of traffic now is coming from a mobile device, and that is continuing to grow. So again, make sure your site's performing really well before you spend a lot of money into creating content and other things that can become really costly on a site. Okay. Number two, we're going to move forward to talk about social media for a second. And how does that impact the ability to have your site discovered? So we all probably, as business leaders or marketers, understand the value and importance of social media. But often we don't get as intentional as we could be around our approach. So first and foremost, really be intentional around your channel ecosystem or selection. And I always advise clients, make sure that you're thinking about where your particular brand, your product, your services belong. And try and make sure that you're deciding which channels you belong on all the time reflect the content that you're providing. So if your content isn't inherently visual and highly engaging from a visual standpoint, maybe you skip Instagram and you focus more on LinkedIn. If your audience is primarily women, you want to look at the channel selection where you have a captive audience of women. So for instance, Pinterest, right? We know Pinterest has right now over 75% of users are female. So great platform if you have a product in that space or a service in that space. And if you want to target Gen Z, you'll probably need to be on TikTok, but you could skip Facebook. So it's about doing as much as you can, but in a very deliberate way. And we'd recommend getting consistent on at least 2 channels before you try and expand to others. So we have lots of clients that come to us and might be thinking, oh, I have to be so active on social, and don't understand the burden that that can place on the business from a content creation to an administrative standpoint. So it's okay to, again, keep it tight and only be on 1 or 2 channels and do really great work on those channels. And then as you get your feet under you, continue to expand. The second thing, how to promote your content. So if you're using resources to create digital content, you should probably be promoting that content on social media. So ways to think about enriching the content specific to social media, make sure you're using interesting charts, quotes, or infographics, as your visuals really need to encourage people to check out the rest of your posts. And one thing we always like to do is experiment. So experiment with some of the tools that are becoming more and more prevalent, including links in the bodies of your posts, doing that in comments, creating more interactive posts like polls or questions. Those all really help to increase engagement with your audience. And if you're on LinkedIn, maybe encourage your employees to connect with your company page and then use the notify feature that exists to let them know when your company puts out more content so that they can engage, reshare. Doing that with your employees can greatly expand your reach. And there's a trend now that you might be hearing about micro influencers. Really, what that means is being able to find truly authentic representatives of your products or services and giving more space to their voice. And a great example of a micro influencer is an employee. Giving voice to your employees is a very cost-effective, authentic way to get the word out about your business. The third piece is about responsiveness. And this is all about the community management aspect of social, right? Finding a cadence for checking on your messages and making sure that you're responding quickly. Oftentimes, I might recommend to a team find specific times on your calendar and block those out to help make sure that that task is able to be accomplished. It's very hard to keep up sometimes with the volume of engagement, and so kind of dedicating time is a really helpful tactic. And then whenever possible, when you're doing responses, make sure you're responding to users via direct message. The reason this is important is because it's the most effective way to ensure that your users and people in your community are actually seeing your responses, because oftentimes comments and replies can get hidden inside the apps. So if you do respond in the comments, definitely tag a user if you can, because that way they'll make sure you're listening and they don't get frustrated with your brand. But if you can, just respond to them via direct message, and then you're ensured that they're getting your messages, and you can continue to create a very personal relationship and communication flow there. Okay, number 3, last one for this section, we're going to talk about paid advertisement for a bit. And if you're just starting out, we usually will recommend a blend of paid social media ads, display ads, Google search, or pay-per-click, which some of you again may consider SEM, right? So most social media platforms are simple-ish, I'd say, to run ads on. What we always recommend, and sometimes clients can forget, is you can boost a post on LinkedIn or Instagram with just a few steps. You don't have to spend a lot either. We've seen, frankly, some really solid results by just spending $10 behind a social media post. And that paid social approach can get complex as you run larger campaigns and you refine your audience. But again, for you, if you're just starting out and considering how to tweak your paid approach, it's a really easy and effective way to connect with and broaden your audience. PCP or PPC campaigns through Google or Bing are a bit more complex, but they can be also extremely effective. And I would say most businesses think of targeting keywords that indicate purchase intent, right? Like buy a new computer. But keep in mind, you can also use these to effectively build awareness and educate your audience. So we often recommend that our clients promote great content with smaller SEM, PPC campaigns to increase their web traffic and build that awareness. Display ads are also a great way to drive awareness, and you have a lot of choices there. Once you get the basics down, it'll be beneficial to expand strategically. So think about where your audience is outside of these digital avenues. We've had some real success with ads on podcasts, local TV, streaming services. Those can quickly get more costly. So again, try and do what you can in a really cost-effective manner through paid social and some of these other things that we mentioned, and then expand from there. Okay, cool. So a couple tips there for you on discoverability. Let's move into engagement and how to drive increased user interest, action, and investment. So I love this next quote. It's, don't worry about failure. You only have to do it right once. And the reason I like this quote is because it's such a pragmatic approach to engagement. I think a lot of times we work with partners where they might be really afraid to innovate and try something new. But you got to remember, at the end of the day, your customers, they're just people, and people are all different, and they're all motivated by very different things. And so thinking that you can do one thing that worked for one audience member or segment of your audience and repeat that for everyone all the time and find success isn't realistic. So again, don't be afraid to try new things and innovate. What we're trying to share today are hopefully some really practical and cost-effective ways, and ways that actually, when I say cost-effective, I also mean in terms of overhead. So things that maybe don't require you having big teams to manage or administrate. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk a little bit about in terms of engagement is this idea of storytelling. And I got a couple examples here on the right that I encourage you to take a look at as I'm kind of going through these particular aspects of storytelling. So The first is really about benefits and not features. And this is so critical, and oftentimes we lose sight because we're really close to our own business and we know it intimately, and so we feel comfortable talking about it and we take assumptions. But the reality is your audience rarely cares what you can do or what features you have. What they care about is what you can do for them and how those things are going to make their lives better. So this first example I have on the right here, thinking about the language and how this is being story told. In this first example, it's the all-in-one platform enabling marketers to achieve their search engine optimization goals. One is misspelled, but also it's very wordy, and I might just frankly blank out as a visitor to the site reading that. The second example is much more specific, right? And it talks about the benefits that you'll receive. Rank higher, get more traffic. So something to keep in mind. Are you really clear when you're creating your site and creating your narratives around your products and services that you're focused on those benefits and not the features? The second thing is how to be clear. So take time to explain how things work. Let customers know when to expect a reminder email or what information they need to set up an account. It's really helpful to explain or show specifically how your product or service works. Trust me, customers will appreciate the transparency and you'll overcome often objections that they might have to engage with a service. This middle example is a really good example of that, right? Getting from this vague, get the big ideas from blank blank nonfiction books and a price to here's how the trial really works. Here's what you can expect from today all the way through the week. It does a lot to help understand the value that I'm getting as a potential consumer. The third thing is around being more specific. So if you're looking at your site copy and wondering if it's telling the right story, scrub the copy for words and phrases like record time, leading, a number of. The reason we don't love those is because they're often vague, and I could see why you would want to use language like that because you don't want to exclude someone, right? You're thinking, oh, well, if I keep it high level, then I don't need to worry. But by being so high level, you end up sounding like everyone else out there, and you're not giving your audience something that they can really start to construct an own narrative and see themselves in. So mentioning things specifically about how long, how often, in what situation or context they can experience is super helpful. Like this example on the bottom, instead of saying video ads turned around in record time, go with something like it's 3 a.m. and you need a video ad for tomorrow. Still gives that same sense of urgency and positions that provider with their benefit, not their feature, but in a very clear and specific way. Okay. Number two, we're going to talk about something that's proprietary to Dragon Army. We, as a company, when we started 10 years ago, started with a game studio in addition to our marketing services. And we did that because we had seen just the traction that gaming had gotten in terms of consumer engagement and investment. And for years, we were thinking all of the things that these games are able to accomplish with an audience are all the things that marketers traditionally have wanted: engagement, interaction, purchase, right? And so when we started the game studio, we really were looking at what are the strategies that gamers are using to make those experiences so sticky, and what could we learn from them when we're working with our partners building a website. And so this example that you have is actually a process that we used with the Cox Media team as we were redoing their site to really start by identifying true priority audiences and what they need. And really, as a business, as we work, one thing we always try and encourage partners is clearly defining the goal at the outset. So as we were redesigning the site, we wanted to really make sure we understood what Cox Media's business goals were and make sure that everything that we did on that site supported those goals. It's a really, I think, fundamental thing that we should all kind of keep in mind, but I can't tell you how many times you get attracted by really interesting dynamic design things or videos and other things, and you start getting those all built into the site, and they're actually not furthering that initial goal. So having that initial goal clearly defined, that's step one in our process here. And this acronym that I have here, AGT, actually stands for Applied Game Theory. So this is the proprietary piece that we did, was really thinking about, okay, how do we take that strategy and apply it to non-game experiences? And so the first part of it is really emphasizing what that goal is. For Cox, it was really, how do we establish trust? How do we grow our partnerships with transparency? And how do we demonstrate results? So with those three clear business objectives in mind, we became really hyper-focused on the content that would be sure to support all of those things. And so we started taking a look at the audience members that we needed to reach. We made sure that the content strategies all upheld those principles. We made sure that we were thinking about engagement tactics that we could use, whether it was a blog post or maybe it was something like a progression bar. Some people are really what we call completionists, and this might be familiar to you if you have a LinkedIn profile and it tells you, oh, you're 75% complete with your profile, right? And you just need to add another photo or do whatever else. People are motivated sometimes by having that. If you play, I do a lot on Duolingo, and I really appreciate the community-based objectives where I can work with my niece or my husband to help learn a language together. Those are really, when I say engagement mechanics, those are elements of things that we pulled from gaming that you can easily use on a site, and they help really create this sense of fun, engagement, and interest from users. So we think about all of those, we think about what could work on a site experience, and then we test and play with some of those components. So what you see there at the bottom is us taking a look at, okay, if someone's really motivated from an accomplishment, then maybe we need to have this mix of tactics and content. If they're really afraid of missing out and they have serious FOMO, maybe it means we present this mix of things to them. And they're all done in balance and measured over time so that we can continue to refine our approach to content. So that's a little bit about AGT. I could talk for days about it. It gets a little heady, so thanks for sticking with me. But if you're interested, please reach out, because it is really a very interesting way to approach content strategy and engagement on your site. So with that, we'll move to a series of things next that are more focused on what I call kind of the design and user interface of the site. And these are trends that we're seeing repeatedly. They've started certainly in the last couple of years as native mobile development has become more prominent, and it really is now transferring over to design principles for web. And one of those is minimalist design. And when we talk about minimalist design, the real benefits is it becomes very user-friendly because it remains clean, uncluttered. It allows your users to quickly find and navigate things that they're looking for on your site. And it really is optimized for mobile devices. So it does ensure a real seamless experience for visitors on a mobile device. And as I mentioned before, with over 60% of traffic coming from mobile devices and over 90% of internet users accessing the internet using a mobile phone, that's really, really critical for your business. The third thing we love about this push towards minimalist design is that the implementation is typically more cost effective compared to other design systems, which makes it a great option for a small business with more limited budgets. And if you use tools and resources out there like Squarespace, Wix, as theme builders, even some of the theme builders that are part of WordPress's ecosystem, a lot of those are pushing towards this minimalist design trend as well. The next one I'm going to speak to kind of takes us a little step further into the animation and interaction space. And so this number 4 is called micro interactions. And as you kind of see the examples here, it's just small, subtle, polished animations that add a touch of interactivity and engagement to a website. And they really do help increase engagement, retain your visitors, all those things, of course, lead to conversion and sales. But really what we love about them most is it's kind of improving the user experience because it gives instant feedback to your users. So it makes the website experience feel more responsive and more intuitive, right? Which always increases a user's confidence. They can tell, oh, I entered that successfully. Great, I'm on my way. It's just a really nice feeling as a user to have that responsiveness. They also can help you really stand out because they're used very sparingly. And so when a user is navigating through your site, it just gives an element of polish and refinement that can really make them create kind of a positive affinity for you and a positive impression about your brand. The last thing is really similar to what I've already said, but that enhanced usability. So not only does it make them feel great, but it does help them complete tasks more quickly and understand the functionality that you do have on your site. Okay, number 5, this continuing the trend of minimalist and micro interactions is this idea of monochromatic, and we're seeing this really start to explode as people struggle with the rising costs of production and photography for their sites. So monochromatic site, it's really hallmarked by its use of one dominant color. So this option or this example that I have here on the right, you see that kind of indigo color. It really creates a very simple, clean, and professional look that's really easy on a user's eye too. Sometimes when you get too color happy, it can start to make the site feel even busier than you intend. And it also distracts from probably the work that you've done to focus on information architecture and how things are arranged on a page. So we really love this trend of kind of just simplifying, using a more monochromatic color palette. I would say when you are playing in this space, it also helps with the versatility of your CTAs. You can really draw attention to type styles and button styles much easier when you kind of stay in this family of that similar color. And then the last but not least, always important, is the cost effectiveness of this, because as we use a more neutralized palette, it reduces, frankly, the number of colors and graphics that we do need on a site. And so as an agency partner, if you're working with an agency partner or developer or designer that's handling your site, it makes it a really ideal choice for anyone who has a more limited budget but is trying to have a high impact design look and feel. Okay, cool. So that's a couple things for engagement. There are so many things that I could have touched upon there, frankly, but wanted to try and give you just a little mix of some of the unique things from a game standpoint and also design standpoint. The third and final pillar that we're going to talk through is inclusivity. And there's a couple critical improvements for your site to make sure that all users can access what they need, and we want to go through those. Some of these may be familiar to you, old hat, but always a nice refresher, I think. And one thing we love about the trend of design accessibility in software is it happened for a reason, right? Like, it's not by chance. It's the simplicity of making things easy to access and read sells, because people can get what they need fast. They appreciate the clarity, and it also allows you to scale much more easily. So as your business grows and as you want to add more products and services, if you've created a really simple construct and foundation for your site to start, it's much easier and cost effective to scale that over time. So we're going to go through the first, which I'm sure many of you know and hopefully are adhering to, but this idea of ADA compliance. And so this is varies dependent upon your business. You may have legal constraints that you have to follow in terms of the level of ADA compliance that you need to hit. There are lots of great free tools out there to determine if your site is in compliance today or not, or how close to being compliant it is. And then there are also lots of professionals like ourselves and our team that are trained and certified in compliance that can help advise you. So a couple really basic things that I always try and remind people. It's really easy to have text overlaid on images. And if you see here in my middle example, it makes it so hard to read. So there are easy tactics you can do, just putting a simple val if you want to put text over images, but I would suggest trying to avoid it when you can, and then just be smart about how you create contrast so that you can have some readability if you are going to layer those things. The second is making sure that your text contrast is at least 4.5 or higher. And that's demonstrated in this bottom one where, you can make a lot of decisions because aesthetically you like the way it looks and it supports your design direction, but they can fail terribly in terms of screen readers and supporting people's access to read and consume your site material. So always keeping in mind that text contrast and making sure that you're making intentional decisions. One thing that I will call out that a lot of people don't know is even the layering of different colors on top of each other. So if you have a CTA button that is one color and you have another color that you're using as your text, that is often, if it's not white or it's not black, those things can be really out of whack in terms of contrast. So you really want to take a look too at the colors that you may be layering, not even just black on white, but what colors you're using for those CTAs and other elements on your site. The third thing is using alt tags and captions for everything. And to be clear, these are just descriptions, text descriptions that should accompany things like photos and images on your site, because a reader will not be able to really interpret what that image is. And so having actual descriptions that clarify that all contributes to if your site stays in compliance or not. I've also included an example here of just some basic things that some sites I see all the time kind of if you see the top example, I'm putting the field title to the left or underneath a field for data entry as opposed to putting it inside the field. It looks modern, it's clean. I know it can be appealing to have that nested inside, but it's terrible in terms of contributing to your compliance for your site. And just to drive this point home, with a stat that I like to remind people, really 1 in 4 Americans right now have some form of disability. So accessibility is really an attribute, and inclusive design and thinking this way is really a method that we need to adhere to. Cool. So next thing about inclusivity is the readability on your site. So most of your audience is going to really skim your copy, right? And given that, it's important that you break it up so you can guide their eye to what they should be skimming. So using headings, subheadings, bold text, calling out quotes really gives readers' eyes places to go. So this example I have, we make multi-channel advertising simple. Great use of what I just mentioned, the headlines, subtext, different use of color, boldness, that can really help draw a customer's eyes to the appropriate things on your web page. The second thing is really reducing jargon. So while some insider language can be really beneficial in signaling your expertise or knowledge about a topic, you genuinely want to avoid any words that might make your audience feel stupid, right? We know when we feel stupid or like we don't know something, we're gonna be less likely to buy things. You want someone to be in a position to feel smart and confident, and using simple language is a great way to do that. So there are 2 common tests you can run to determine how easy it will be for visitors to your site to read and consume your copy. The first is a reading level, and the second is reading ease. We like to say that roughly half of the US population is really reading at a 6th grade or below level, and that means they're really struggling with a lot of making inferences out of copy. So the more clear you can be, especially if you're in a business area where maybe your content is highly technical. We work with like a ceramic engineering firm, for instance, and it's really challenging because, again, they want to emphasize their expertise and knowledge about those materials and the applications, but having too high a reading level on their website just makes it harder for people to digest their content. So I would say don't push it above an 8th grade reading level if you're in a highly technical area, and definitely keep your reading ease score at about 60 at least for most of your copy. And I included here a couple tools we like to use to be able to score these things. So just like you can get tools to determine where your compliance level is towards ADA, these Hemingway and others are really great. And if you're looking for a tool to just help you as you're creating copy and make sure that you're keeping that at the right level, Grammarly has a really great free product. Word is another one. And it just really makes that readability issue a lot easier. The last point I'll make on this is having great readability is also amazing for people who may not be native English speakers, right? And we know we have a lot of those in the US, and not to mention if your company or brand is global. So keeping this in mind all does help for any speakers to read and understand your content. Great. Got one more for you, and this is about creating user-centric UX, which might sound a little redundant, but it's amazing how much user experience stuff we see that isn't really keeping the user in mind. And so here's a great example, one I cannot stand, which is dark UX practices. So dark UX practices, we describe those as the temptation of engaging in something where you know it's right for your business, but it's not great for your customer. So something like you don't want your customers to be able to easily find a call number because you want to reduce the numbers of calls you get. Or you don't want them to have an easy time of deleting their account or unsubscribing because it doesn't help your business. The reality is when they are looking for that stuff, they don't want it hidden. And it's really unfair to a user and it makes them dislike your brand even more. So really trying to avoid engaging in those practices, it really helps create more affinity and respect for your brand. Second thing is making sure implementation matches intention. What I mean by that is you can have the best UX in the world, you can create beautiful wires, you can create beautiful page level designs to take those wires into development, but once it's in development, it can fail. So a tap target or a touch target is a great example of that. It looks beautiful, you love how it looks, you love the colors, it's compliant, but when it goes into development, it's slightly too small. And so as a user, especially on mobile, is trying to tap something, it can be really frustrating. That can lead to abandonment of your website and potentially business for your brand. So we want to make sure that as you go through that design process and as you're thinking about those choices that they don't get lost once you're in development. Make sure, I always advise, and we do this with our work, we have someone from our design team always double checking something as it gets into implementation and make sure it was implemented the way it was intended by our designers. And then the last thing is making sure your site is accessible. We've talked a lot about accessibility. We've talked a lot about making sure your site is responsive, but just don't want you to forget that not only do you have to consider is someone on an iOS or an Android device or something else, but the operating systems that they're on, right, from a software standpoint, how old their devices are, and making sure that you're always monitoring the analytics on those things so you understand the bulk of your audience and what they're on so that you can make sure that as you're building your site, you're supporting that. So if you have a ton of people using Chrome, you want to make sure you're really testing and that your site performs well there. You could maybe deprioritize something else if you don't have a lot of Safari users or something like that. So it's really just being smart about knowing where your audience is coming from, what devices and software they're using, and make sure that you're constantly thinking about that. I mentioned before that Google in particular has switched up their algorithms in the last couple of years to really prioritize mobile. So having favorable mobile first designs and implementations is more important than ever before. Okay, I got one last thing about a couple trends just to keep in mind as you continue to explore. I think we hit a lot of the basics, but just wanted to give you three more that I know you've heard about and some of you may be implementing, but I think these are going to continue to be trends, and I want to make sure you have very actionable ways to be thinking about them for yourself. So AI, we all know what this is probably at this point, but it really has changed the way the landscape is in terms of how we interact with our work. And that's going to be the same for your website and for your business. So as you think maybe as a small or medium-sized business owner, what do I need to know about AI? How do I take advantage of it? I think there's a couple easy ways to think about that. It certainly powers improved customer service. So providing instant, more accurate responses to frequently asked questions or requests. That's one great example of how AI can be used on your site. Also can obviously be used to make a more personalized or customized experience for your customers. So recommending products or services based on their browser history or purchase history, those types of things are all just another example of AI. It can also aid in any automation that you may have. So if you have repetitive tasks that are happening, maybe something like processing orders or tracking inventory, using AI in that application could help you as a small business owner or marketer refocus your time and effort on other things. The thing with that is really just figuring out for your business the right usage, and then obviously taking a look at analytics to figure out how you can continue to expand your use of it in the future. I mentioned page speeds before, but I just really want to make sure to drill down kind of the benefit of looking at your site performance. One, at a very simple level, people get frustrated when they come to a site and it takes too long to load. You get higher bounce rates, and you can get certainly decreases in conversion. But second, and I mentioned this a bit, performance also impacts your search rankings, right? So again, Google is taking a look at that. They want to make sure that they're pushing people to sites that are going to give people great experiences. So having a fast loading site does impact where you are in those rankings. And it can improve the accessibility point, my third point, because you're able to give people who maybe have poor connection or not as great internet services a better experience, because their site pages might load in that environment much better as long as it's performing well. So definitely want to be considering that. And finally, from a cost saving standpoint, there are things that you should know about in terms of your hosting, because slower sites can increase the server needs for hosting a site. And so if you have a good optimized site that's running well, you could potentially see some reduced costs in terms of your hosting. AR, or augmented reality, this one has almost become ubiquitous now, I think in large part thanks to social media platforms, and filters are probably the most easily accessible example of an AR tactic, but it really is becoming a great tool in sales and marketing. And I think for a long time it felt like VR something that was maybe harder or too complex for businesses to touch. And I think now there are lots of tools that are web-based AR tools, so you don't need to have a native application. It doesn't need to be something that only exists in a mobile app, and so if you don't have one, you can't use it. I would really encourage you to consider and take a look at some of the advancements that have been made in web-based AR. We've been building a lot of it. It's great for cost effectiveness too, because it can launch from any platform. So it doesn't matter if you're an Apple user or a Google user. Obviously, you don't need any hardware for it like you do for VR, but it can open up a lot of opportunities to engage your customers. So whether product tutorials, interactive guides, immersive setup things, if you have a product that has a pretty cumbersome setup or connection setup, these tools are really, really helpful to augment what you're already doing on your website. So I think we are almost at time to get into our Q&A, and I did have a couple that were shared initially, so I have a few slides to hit those if we want, but we can start wherever you think best, Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. I mean, so much great content. And as as advertising partners for a lot of the folks here on the call, we often find ourselves in conversations talking about digital presence because it's such a critical complement to advertising. You mentioned this earlier on in the presentation, but ensuring that when someone sees a television ad or sees a display ad or a digital video, when they're clicking or when they're searching for that business's name, that they're met with a positive digital experience. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about that and some of the things we can do. I was taking notes furiously through that, and it was incredible. I can't wait to go implement some of that on our own coxmedia.com site. But like you said, we do have a few minutes for some questions. We got some, like you mentioned, from some folks who registered. So we'll start with those, but I want to go ahead and say if you do have a question you'd like to ask Jen, go ahead and put it in the question box on your screen. Okay, so one of the ones we got early on was, I believe this is from a government agency, and the question was, our website is state-run and not specific to our agency. Knowing this, how might we create or increase engagement on our social media channels?
Yeah, and so I did assume, it's funny you said that this might be a government site, because that's common when you don't have ultimate control over the content on the site. So I think if you have more control on your social media platforms, a couple great ways to consider increasing engagement might be switching to video. So if you've been in the tendency of having content that is text, thinking about how to maybe make short GIFs, moving elements for things that would have been static. There are a lot of tools now where it's easy to do. I mean, the one great thing about the progression of our phones and our hardware is you can almost make really great quality video now just by using a cell phone. And so, and because more and more people are doing it, I think the bar and expectation is like, okay, that's cool. Like, I don't need a movie shot, right? Like, this is okay. I say video because a lot of the algorithms are prioritizing video for search too. So the more you can switch your content to video, I think the more engagement you're going to see, and it helps you elsewhere. The other one, I mentioned a little bit about this, but giving your audience a real reason to respond. So questions, polls, quizzes, giveaways, they're really a great way to get people to get engaged faster with you. And I also think answering common questions. So you can really elevate your perception as an expert and a go-to when you can answer the most commonly asked questions from your audience. And a good piece of advice there is maybe talk to your sales team. They're probably getting a lot of questions all the time. And if you don't know which ones to be positioning or talking about on social media, asking them, what are the common things that our customers or prospects are asking? And use that to help drive some of that content that you're creating on social media. I just saw a post about hair extensions, and I know nothing about them, but it was so intriguing that I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like it was just, it drew me in, and I really had no interest, but it was because I was learning and they were answering common questions that I wouldn't have even thought of. Another thing might be kind of going behind the scenes or giving away some of your secrets. So sharing struggles is just a really great way to make you feel authentic and real and relatable. So explaining maybe how something works in your business or how it happens behind the scenes, it really gives users more knowledge, but also a better sense for your company and your organization. And then the last one, we talked a bit about this today, but throw a little bit of money at it. $10 here or there can really boost a simple post. It doesn't take much, but it can help you stand out and broaden your reach just by putting a little bit behind it. So that can make a world of difference for your engagement as well.
We're getting some really interesting questions coming in the chat box, so I'm going to bounce around a little bit.
Do it.
One of the ones we just got was regarding SEO and specifically content. So regarding SEO, how important is a stream of new content? I understand the need for cornerstone content like location pages, product pages, etc. All of those are important, but specifically asking about posting blogs to try and rank for different keywords.
Yeah. Um, New content is great, but it is hard to keep up with volume. I understand that. So one of the things we always suggest to kind of keep the balance between freshness and volume concerns is be really smart with your content. Maybe over the course of the year, plan 3 white papers or 3 longer format pieces of content that you can use in one aspect, and then chunkify for use across social, across webinars, other things. So you're kind of maximizing the bang for the buck, and it allows you to do that kind of freshness of content that you may otherwise struggle to stay on top of. So I really love kind of coming up with something that's maybe a little longer and then finding ways in terms of the way you format that and construct it to recycle that elsewhere.
That makes a lot of sense. Earlier, you were talking about the engagement section and micro interactions. We have a question. Someone was very interested in those. You engaged them. How can I find out more on how to utilize those? Is it done with plugins, widgets? Where's a good place to start looking at some of those micro interaction options?
Yeah, great question. So again, I think where that took off was really in the mobile space. So I think looking at best class practices for Apple and Google, they have standards that they use that they expect brands to follow. And a lot of these things are really detailed super clearly in their guidelines. So I would suggest starting there to read up on it, to understand the variety of different micro actions. Because they spend so much time as Google and Apple defining these, they really are best in class, and they consider all of the things that we talked about today in terms of best user practice. So I think that is a great resource to start. And then I would say, Google's great. Start Googling, see examples of how those are being used on other sites to draw inspiration for what might make most sense for your particular site or brand.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, and this is something we talked a lot about with the Dragon Army team when we were updating our own site, is the user journey. Can you just spend 60 seconds describing what you mean by user journey and how the audience should be thinking about pulling people through a user journey with their digital presence?
Sure. So I think in traditional marketing sense, we used to talk about a funnel, right? And the user would start at the top, maybe get engaged by broad content, and then narrowly funnel through. When we talk about user journey from a digital standpoint, what we're talking about is really 2 things: the platforms and channels that they're hitting and the opportunities to engage them. So someone might first get introduced to your brand or product or service through a social post, right? That might link to your website. They might spend time on your website. They might sign up for a newsletter that you have, and then they are now in your email and CRM database. Those users all come in, enter, exit at various points. So when we think about mapping out a user journey, we think about our priority audiences, who we want to reach, and the likely journeys that they're taking across our ecosystem and outside our ecosystem, frankly, right? And so I think, again, identifying the channels, identifying the opportunities to engage with them, and then thinking about what it is from a business standpoint that you're looking to achieve. Is a goal get more users just signed up so that you can message them, right? Then you might be more focused on capturing email. If your goal is to have them make a purchase, there might be things that you need to look at in terms of your flow, particularly on your site from a shopping cart standpoint, to drive that. So the user journey can be really expansive, and you can also focus on discrete segments of it to make sure that you're always accomplishing that business goal or objective too.
Thank you. Well, we are running out of time, and we have a number of questions we didn't get to. What we'll do is we'll follow up with Jen and we'll see if we can turn some of these questions into a blog article for you guys and post those on the coxmedia.com blog. So again, all the time we have for today. Thank you again, Jen, so much. We really appreciated the expertise, and it was both broad and deep. So thank you.
It's a pleasure.
As a quick reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be emailed to all of you, and we'll be back again next quarter with another guest expert and some more great content. So we really hope you'll all be able to join us again then. In the meantime, like I said, you can check out our website, coxmedia.com, for articles, ebooks, and recordings of some of our previous Ask the Experts webinars. And as always, for any additional questions regarding today's content, you can always contact your Cox Media consultant. If you're not a current customer, you can visit coxmedia.com to connect with one of our media experts. So thank you all again. Thank you, Jen, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Have a good one.
Have a good one.